This is Ken Spangenberg. Today I'm here with mental skills coach for the Philadelphia Phillies, Geoff Miller. Geoff, how you doing?
I'm good, Ken. How are you?
Not too bad. How are you holding up in all this?
Um, okay. I think the homeschooling's probably been the hardest part for us, and just generally keeping our kids entertained and being able to juggle work. But we're safe and we're healthy and everybody's fine.
Yeah, that's all we can ask for, right?
Hmm.
But obviously, the spring is looking a lot different than what you had originally planned for yourself, I'm sure. We've talked a bunch before. I'm kind of curious, how you got into mental skills in the first place, because when you did, I don't think it was as common as it is today, right?
Yeah, it wasn't exactly a thing then.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's funny. I find myself dating myself earlier and earlier in conversations these days. But when I found out about sports psychology, it was in the 1991 World Series, and I always tell the story about how John Smoltz turned his season around. He had been 2-12 in the first half of the season, and he went 12-1 in the second half after starting to work with a sports psychologist. And uh, MVP of the NLCS, and pitched 9 scoreless innings in Game 7 of the '91 World Series, and then the Braves lost in the 10th inning after he had been taken out of the game. So John Smoltz was the first person that I had ever heard of that had worked with someone to change the way he thought about the game. And from the moment I heard that, it's what I wanted to do. And then when I got into it professionally in 2005, my first season in the major leagues, I think there were maybe 3 of us doing that kind of work at the time.
Yeah, it's unbelievable how your profession's evolved. And just out of curiosity, why the shift from mental strength coach to mental skills coach?
I've never been a mental strength coach.
I just feel like that's the first one I ever heard. But now you see mental skills a lot more.
I've always said mental skills. I mean, I think what you're asking is maybe a bigger question is, what's the difference between all these titles? And I think role confusion is still really prevalent in the game and outside the game today. I think, even that term sports psychologist, that's what everybody used to call everyone, whether they were a psychologist or not. And then it became very important to clarify, I'm not a psychologist because I'm not. And so I thought mental skills coach was the best way to do that. My first year, before we actually got started, people in the front office were trying to introduce me, and they're going, "This is our sport psychology performance consultant," and nobody really knew what to call it. And so mental skills coach is what I settled on. I have some friends that call themselves mental conditioning coaches. To me, I don't think it really matters what the title is. I think there are 2 things to make sure that you're differentiating and clarifying. One is this a performance-based role or is it a clinical role? And the work that I do is performance-based. There's nothing clinical about it. And I think that's when I use the term role confusion, I think that's one of the big confusing things out there is people think that the work I do is with people who are depressed or people who have drug and alcohol problems or, anxiety or ADD or those kinds of things. And that's all handled by our employee assistance program. And we have a former Philly who was a World Series pitcher, Dickie Knowles, who handles our EAP program. And he is absolutely the best in the game. He's the only EAP professional that actually played in the big leagues. And now we're starting to have a couple of mental skills coaches who have major league experience. Bob Tewksbury being the most tenured, and John Lannon has just finished his degree, and now he's working with the Toronto Blue Jays. So we're starting to see some former players coming back and getting their education and participating in this field.
Yeah, I'm sure after just going through the struggles of playing, especially at that high of a level, you can really appreciate how important the mental skills are. You said you started off in 2005. If you felt like players are more receptive talking to you now, that basically what you do is more commonplace than, in the very beginning?
Yes and no. I mean, I think it was a harder discussion to have back then. And there was a lot more, what is it exactly that you do? I think what's easier now is almost everybody has had some kind of mental skills coaching, whether it was in college or with another organization, or even high school players have had some kind of exposure to it now. So it's much easier for them to understand what it is now.
Yeah, no, I definitely think you're right. It's really cool to see, the focus on the mental part of the game in the past, 5, 6, 7 years. It seems like it's really changed. Is there anything you attribute to that and being on the inside?
To the growth of mental skills in
Yeah,
baseball? Yeah, I mean, I think just looking for competitive advantages, understanding the importance of it, and um, you know, trying to find every way to develop as many major league players as possible, and make sure that those players have an opportunity to fulfill their potential.
for sure, for sure. So for someone who's, just looking into this, or they're not too familiar with mental skills, what would be your recommendations on where they should start? Is it a book? Is it talking to someone like yourself? Um, what tasks would you recommend?
Yeah, I mean, I think definitely there are lots of great books out there that could be starting points. I think just doing any kind of a Google search these days on mental skills, you'll find plenty of blogs and plenty of articles written about them. And again, the nice thing is you can find almost daily some kind of an article about a major league team working with a mental skills coach, or a player that's championing the work that they did with a mental skills coach. So I think that's a really nice starting point. And I would actually point to one of the legends in our field who passed away a couple of years ago. Ken Revisa was one of the first to do this, and one of the first to write books about the mental game of baseball, and which actually is Harvey Dorfman's title. But Ken Revisa had some really cool interviews and video footage that I think was done with Evan Longoria. So if people were searching for that, I think they'd be able to find it pretty easily.
Yeah, for sure. He was the first mental skills coach that I really had heard of. So I think he's definitely a good starting point. Another good one would be your book. I'll plug you, so you don't have to. But I really enjoyed it. I think it was a very, very cool and relatable way that you wrote it. Whether as it was more stories than it was, stating different tricks and tips. How did you come across that? How did you decide on that format?
Well, I did what I would tell people in a non-quarantine environment to do, is go to Barnes and Noble and look at the bookshelf, and I think I did that for 15 years. Every time I went into a bookstore, I would look to see what new sports psychology books had come out, and they felt very formulaic to me. And not, no disrespect to any of the other books, but I just felt like every mental game book had this same kind of formula, where there's a visualization chapter, there's a routine chapter, there's a self-talk chapter, there's a deep breath chapter, and they're all kind of the same, with plug in different names and different sports, and a different anecdote here or there, but it's the same content. And so I felt like I wanted to take a different approach to it. I had always enjoyed writing, and had written some other things on projects that I was really happy with, and I felt like writing in that style was the way that I wanted to do it. It actually took me, well, I collected ideas for intangibles for about 5 years. I knew I wanted to write a book someday. I didn't know what that was going to look like. But what I started doing is, anytime I had a conversation with a player that I thought was pretty memorable, I would write myself an email, and I just started a folder that was called Book Brainstorms. And I would just email myself a couple of paragraphs and stick it in that folder. And I did that for 5 years. And one day I just thought, well, let's see how many ideas I have. And I had about 80 emails in there. And I still didn't know what the book was going to be, but I thought, well, what if I just took one of these concepts and I wrote a short story about it, and just for fun, and just to see what that felt like. And I did that, and I liked it. And so I did it again with another one, and I liked it. And then I thought, well, maybe this is the book. Maybe it's a collection of short stories. And then as I was writing them, I started to see this common theme emerging through the stories. And that's how the format of the book, and really that the concept of know who you are, know what you want, know what to do when you don't get it. That's kind of an underlying theme in each of the stories.
Yeah, and that really leads us into, what we're going to be talking about the most. And I think formulaic is probably the best way to describe a lot of the other sports psych books or mental skills books that I've read. It's 1 + 2 = 3. And I'm sure that's not how it usually works. And that's why your book is so cool, because it really struck me as more about relationships and building trust, and then you're able to help people. And I imagine that's one of the reasons why you wrote it like that.
Yeah.
So I think everyone listening is going to want to use this to either get themselves better, get their players better, get their sons better, daughters, whoever. And you mentioned a few different, for lack of a better term, tips or strategies in the mental game that are commonly used. So I figured we talk about some of them. So visualization is one that I hear all the time. It seems to be popular. What misperceptions do you see with that? What ways or times do you think that kind of would be valuable?
Well, let me back up a little bit. I guess the way that I would, what's common is someone will say to me, "So, do you teach visualization?" And I'll say, "Well, kind of." I'm not going to sit someone down and go, "Okay, step one is we're going to do some visualization exercises." I think the first thing I'm going to do when I meet with someone is get to know them and find out what it is, who they are, what they want, what their career has been like, what has been successful for them in the past, where they have had obstacles. And if I think that doing some visualization would help them, then I might tell them to do that. But I'm not going to tell every single person that I work with, "Okay, it's visualization time because it's 3 o'clock on Friday." Visualization, I think, is a very helpful tool. And I think it can be used for a lot of different, different purposes. To me, I think one of the most underutilized ways visualization happens is you can use visualization to improve your skills. I think most people use it to feel confident. They do visualizing because they want to see themselves being successful. And I think there's a time and a place for that. But especially if you're talking about young developing athletes, I think visualization is a very helpful thing. And they did some visualization on, feeling the ball coming out of their hand, or, having some kind of, was that me or you, Ken?
I think that was you, but we're good.
All right.
That's all right.
So having some kind of, like, I'm seeing myself throwing a bullpen, and I'm seeing the movement of my changeup, and I'm seeing it kind of, as a left-handed pitcher, I'm seeing it kind of fade away to a right-handed hitter, or, duck down under a left-handed hitter's bat, that kind of thing. I think being able to improve your skill using visualization without actually getting the physical reps, I think, is something that people don't talk about.
No, and you're dead on. I mean, honestly, beyond you, I really haven't heard anyone say that. And we've had, college coaches, we've had professional, hitting coaches on, and they all talk about visualization. But like you said, they're all tied to confidence. So that's a really interesting point and a tip, especially with what we're dealing with right now. I mean, not everyone's going to have access to a T or an L screen, but everyone has access to their imagination and their mind.
Right.
Are there any, strategies inside that you'd recommend to someone who's listening to this and wants to try it? Like, should they go somewhere quiet? Should they, listen to music, no music? Like, is there anything you think would help?
I mean, to me, I think it's personal preference. I don't think music would be all that helpful unless someone felt like that was something that helped get them in the moment a little bit more. I think, again, I mean, to me, it's, you could be sitting down, you could actually be standing up and acting out some of this if you want it to feel a little bit more physical. You could be a hitter and holding a bat in your hands and just kind of standing in a stance and closing your eyes. I think those are all things that you could be doing. Or you could be sitting in a chair or lying down and not be doing any of it. But I think that's all personal preference. I think going back to the idea about confidence, though, and visualization, I think that's another place that people make mistakes. And I see it a lot, is people visualize a pitcher visualizes an inning and strikes out 3 hitters on 9 pitches, right? And how often is that really the case that happens in a game? So when we visualize for success and we don't put in any kind of realistic scenarios, then we get into a game and it's like, well, in my head, I've been visualizing having a nice clean inning, and now I just walked the leadoff hitter. So now I don't know what to do because I haven't been practicing that. I've only been practicing having 1, 2, 3 innings where I strike out the side. So I think, again, I think from a non-traditional standpoint, I would say I want to see people visualizing failure because I want to have them practice being in that moment of, giving up a leadoff triple and then being able to strand the guy on third instead of just having a nice, easy inning.
That's another thing I really haven't heard very often, but it makes complete sense. I mean, as coaches, I think we're always telling players to train as close to game-like situations as possible. Like, why should visualization be much different? So when you are teaching someone how to visualize or helping them with their visualization and dealing with failure, are they going pitch by pitch, or are they going batter to batter, inning to inning? Does it depend on the player?
Yeah, I think it should be pitch by pitch. Again, I think the words that I would use as a common theme throughout anything that I'm doing is realistic and honest, and maybe authentic would be another one. Is you want this to feel like it really feels, and so if it's not realistic, then when you get out into an actual competition, that practice isn't going to be all that helpful.
No, I mean, that makes complete sense. So say, I'm a pitcher and I'm visualizing an inning and I give up a hit. What would be the next steps on my end to deal with that?
Well, I think it's you want to understand what the pitcher is going to be wanting to work on. If I'm working on trying to control my emotions, then I see myself give up a hit and maybe I get angry and then I go into some kind of a routine or something that allows me to go, okay, let me get this under control and get into a set position and get my sign and be able to pitch with a runner on base and not have it bother me. I think that would be a perfect scenario for someone that's feeling like, okay, I get frustrated when I don't get what I want.
For sure. And that's really cool. I mean, that's definitely something I'm going to share with our guys. So you mentioned Ken Revisa and his work with Evan Longoria, very famous stuff. The one thing I always remembered for whatever reason was he talked about a reset trigger. He looked at the foul pole and kind of tracked the top to the bottom to basically help him forget what just happened, kind of similar to the visualization we were just talking about. Do you feel like there's value to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think any kind of a reset button is important. Um, my school of training has always been around um, understanding how people pay attention and understanding that internal versus external focus or broad versus narrow focus and how that impacts our performance. And so what Ken figured out is how to get outside your head without even knowing that you're getting outside your head. So really the point is when I'm thinking too much, whether it's negative thought or just too many thoughts, if I'm not thinking about what I'm supposed to be thinking about, I can look out to the foul pole or the flag pole, or I can find a sign or any of those focal points that he mentioned. And in doing that and taking a deep breath, I've suddenly stopped my thinking because my focus is out there instead of in here.
So would you, going back to visualization, would you tie your reset button into that visualization? Would
Yeah,
that make it more effective in game?
definitely.
Awesome. So you mentioned routine, and again, that's another very popular thing in baseball and really in like the mental skills part of the game as well. Is that something that you encourage with your players?
I don't encourage it. And again, it's not something that I'm going to say, okay, tell me about your routine. I got to hear about it, right?
Right.
But where it starts is, I am struggling with this. I'm struggling with, being able to see the ball well right now, and then I'm going to ask some questions about how do you see the ball when you're playing well? How do you see the ball when you're hitting well? Okay, now I'd like to hear about your routine. What do you do when you get in the box? And is this something that you do every single pitch? Do you have a routine that you only do when you feel like you're out of sorts? And I mean, I think that is really, I see people in mostly in those two categories. Is I have a routine for when things are going bad, or I have a routine that I do every pitch. I personally like the every pitch one because it's very difficult to know when things are going bad, and it's usually a couple pitches too late when you realize it.
Right.
So I think that's something that's important to do, is to be able to have something that you can do every single pitch.
So you would almost recommend developing your routine the other way around. I feel like most people think about the routine from the very beginning and then they work their way to the at bat. You're saying think about the problem or think about the solution and then build your routine to help that. Is that accurate?
Yes and no. I
Okay.
guess what I'm saying is I'm not going to be militant about saying you have to have a routine. Ultimately, what I think is if you know what to do and can do it when it counts, then you don't have to have a routine. Um, if you want a routine, great. If you don't want a routine and you know what to do and you can do it when it counts, then that's fine. You're someone who can perform without needing a routine. I think what I'm saying is don't have a routine just to have a routine. Have a routine and understand what the purpose of that routine is. And if you're a hitter, the purpose of your routine is to get you ready to hit. And so I think that's the mistake that I see hitters making all the time is, it's very common for guys to take a deep breath and stare at the label of the bat. And what happens after that sometimes gets lost, which is now I'm supposed to get ready to hit and see the ball coming out of the pitcher's hand. But what I see hitters doing a lot is they take a deep breath, they pick their focal point, and when they're done, they evaluate their confidence or their comfort level, and then they go, wait, I was supposed to feel more confident after I took this breath, and I don't. And so now what do I do? And so to me, I think it's not the fact that we're not always perfectly confident or relaxed or focused, whether we take that deep breath or not. I think it's that we panic when we don't feel that way.
Yeah, and that's a really good point. And I do think you see a lot of maybe fake routine. Guys know they're supposed to do something, so they do it, but they don't have the conviction necessarily where it's given the effect that you'd want it to give.
Well, and
So
I guess I would equate it to I think a practice swing in golf is like the perfect metaphor for this, because people take a practice swing in golf simply to just kind of loosen up and like feel the shot they're going to hit. You don't have to take a perfect swing in your practice swing to hit a good shot. But then I see golfers all the time where they're like, oh yeah, my hands weren't good in that practice swing, or something's off. And they start breaking down their mechanics on their practice swing when all it was supposed to do was just keep your hands loose, right? So I think that's what I would say about having a routine and taking a deep breath, whether you're a pitcher or a hitter or an infielder or an outfielder. The point is to simply prepare yourself for the next pitch. So do it, and if it didn't work 100%, you better be ready for the next pitch anyway.
I like that. That's good. Because it's not, I mean, I think Ken Rivera said you're basically not, I'm really chop it up, basically said you're not always going to feel your best, so figure out a way to compete anyway. I always like that, because I think we'd all be lying if we said we woke up out of bed every day and then had our A game.
Yeah.
A lot of times you have your C or D, and I'm sure that goes for you as well, not just for players. You have to figure out a way to use some of these tools that you're mentioning to, bring your A game and be effective.
Well, I've always said that, and I think that's a great point, Ken. I have always equated, whether it was feeling good or just confidence, I equate that to energy level or physical health. I think everyone understands and recognizes that at a certain point in the season they're going to be tired, and they're probably going to be aching, and they're probably going to have some kind of physical ailment. And you have that phrase of give 100% of your 80%. So everybody recognizes that they're going to be physically exhausted at some point in the season, and they're going to have to keep going. But for some reason, they don't expect that their confidence isn't going to be there every day. And when their confidence isn't there, then they panic. And they think, I've got to have this set of mental tricks to help get me to that place where I feel better so I can go play. but I'm not going to feel better physically. So it should be okay to not feel better mentally as well.
Yeah, that's really interesting for sure. So, I mean, another big one I'm sure you hear all the time is like slowing the game down. You hear players ask coaches, how do you slow the game down? I'm sure you get that one a lot. What kind of recommendations do you have for someone who gets in the game and it feels like it's going 1,000 miles an hour?
Well, so let's back up again. So
There we go.
why does the game speed up?
I think with most of these guys, it's just not being confident in themselves.
Okay. Um, uh, I think the game speeds up when we're thinking too much for any reason. Some of that is evaluating confidence. Some of that is feeling doubt. But the game usually speeds up when we move up a level, right? Or if we're having a rough week, the game speeds up on us. And again, I think you could fill in the blank for any different reason why the game is speeding up, and it's always going to come back to thinking too much. And so I think some of that is an actual time equation that there's 30 seconds between pitches, and if I'm scanning my brain for what's going on right now, or if I'm taking a deep breath and not feeling confident and starting to think about why don't I feel confident right now, I don't have as much time as I do if I just step in the box, take a deep breath, and start looking for the pitch. So I think the game can speed up on people in a real way when they're thinking too much, because they're taking more time to get themselves ready for the next pitch.
Now, would you recommend for someone that has that problem to visualize the game speeding up and kind of teaching themselves to slow it down, where there's not the pressure of fans, other players, and all that?
Not That wouldn't be my first thought.
Okay.
I mean, to me, if the game is speeding up, I'm going to want to know, what is it that feels different right now? Why are you feeling like you have to do more here? Why, I mean, that's something that's very common that I see is guys that are very successful in AA and AAA, and they get called up to the big leagues, and suddenly they feel like they have to reinvent themselves. I'm sure the same is true, from a high school to a college kind of a jump, and we see it all the time. Guys hit 600 in high school, and then they come to the Gulf Coast League and they hit 200, right? And so some of that is definitely better competition, and some of that is adjusting to the league, right? So I think that adjustment to the league is about being able to feel comfortable in your surroundings, and some of that is actual physical. Some of it is as simple as I'm in a new city and I'm not I don't know where the ballpark is. I don't know where the restaurants are. I don't know where my surroundings are. I've got a new roommate that I've never met, and I'm just trying to learn all of this at the same time. So I think there's a lot of adjustment that goes into that. But ultimately, I think slowing the game down, and this gets back to our theme, is there's not really a trick to it. The game slows down like that as soon as you feel comfortable. So I think ultimately it's about understanding what's making you feel uncomfortable, and trying to just focus on the things that which is being able to see a good pitch and pick it out and hit it, right? Like, you can do that whether you're comfortable or not.
That's awesome. No, this is definitely really interesting, and I think it's some good stuff for all the players out there listening. So the last one we had down was dealing with failure, and I think people say it's a game of failure almost to the point of nauseum. It's probably too much. What are you mentioned kind of embracing failure already, because it's going to happen. What kind of advice do you give players about handling adversity?
Well, so I think from intangibles, that formula that I have of know who you are, know what you want, know what to do when you don't get it. Um, I really feel like a lot of the frustration people have in dealing with failure has more to do with the knowing what you want part. I think people set goals that don't help them ultimately get what they want. They might be more short term thinking about what I want in the moment, and it conflicts with what they really want in the big picture. And so I guess what I mean by that is, um, dealing with failure usually is about, having an 0 for 4 moment, or, something like that. And to me, I think the most important thing you can be thinking about is, what do I want, big picture? And I'm guessing most of your viewers and listeners are saying, I want to be a big leaguer someday, right? And so if what you want is to be a big leaguer, then your job is to learn from the experience. It's to learn from the game. It's not to hit 400. It's not to hit a home run today. Those are all signs that you're doing things right. But you should still be learning from that, even if you're being successful. And so I think if what you say you want is, I want to learn everything I can about myself as a baseball player every single day that I go out there and compete, and I want to compete hard and I want to give my best. And if those are the kinds of things that you're saying you want, then it's pretty easy to deal with failure, because you can't lose at the end of the day. You're always going to learn something, and you're always going to know that you gave your best. What I think is difficult is people say that they want all those things and they believe that those are important, but then they don't get a hit and then they get sad. So I think that's the hard part.
Yeah, and that's I think that's an awesome way to look at it. Perspective is just so powerful, and especially in a game where you can go for 12. It's good to still be able to get better by going 0 for 12. It's definitely something that you can do. So
I had a player one time who was striking out too much, and in the middle of this conversation, I said to him, "What if it was a good thing that you were striking out right now?" And he looked at me like I was crazy, and he's like, "Okay, I'm waiting." And so we started talking about, okay, well, why are you striking out? Are you striking out swinging, or are you striking out looking? And so if you're striking out swinging, are you swinging at strikes? Are you swinging at pitches out of the zone? Are you not recognizing off-speed pitches, right? There's so much you could be learning from striking out, but we get so, I can't strike out. I don't want to strike out. I'm so mad when I do strike out. If you're striking out looking, are you striking out looking because you're being too selective? Are you, are you actually right? Like, did you take a ball that the umpire called a strike, right? Like, so there are so many things that you can learn even from an 0 for 4 with 4 strikeouts. But it's hard for people to see past the failure there.
Yeah, and I definitely see that. I think every time I'm out at the ball field. So if I'm a player and I'm listening to this and I'm really enjoying it, I think your 3 questions from intangibles is really powerful. Do you recommend them, writing that out, answering those 3 questions to themselves?
Yeah, I think that's a great place to start. I mean, I think the knowing who you are is really important. And so, if you're a young player, I think it's simple as, am I a pitcher? Am I a hitter? And is it too early to know that yet? And if I'm a pitcher, am I someone that's going to be able to dominate with my fastball? Am I going to have to use my command? Just understanding what your strengths are in each of the areas of your game. And then thinking about it from a personality or a mental perspective of, do I like to be in pressure moments? Or do I like to be in more comfortable times? Do I hate working out by myself? Or, do I love going off by myself and throwing a ball against the wall? Some of those kinds of things to really understand what's going to make you successful.
How often do you think that, that type of exercise should be done? Like, do you think that's a kind of an ever-changing document, or do you think that's something that you commit to it, you put in work, you write it down, and you stick to it for a while?
I think it could always be evaluated. I think, I guess more importantly than that would be having some kind of a review process, having some kind of an understanding for how you self-evaluate, how tough you are on yourself, or if you're not tough enough on yourself. I think 2 questions that would be very easy to ask and would give you a lot of information about yourself without even knowing is, what am I doing well and what do I need to improve? If you're asking yourself that every day, there are people that I know that can make long lists of what they're doing well, and they can't think of anything that they need to improve, right? So they probably need to be tougher on themselves. And there are people who will make you a long list of, these are 10 things that I need to improve. Well, what are you doing well? Nothing. right? So those people are going to be too tough on themselves. So to be able to balance that, I think is a really important and difficult skill to develop.
Yeah, I feel like you almost end up being one way or the other. It's tough to be perfectly, be able to evaluate yourself. You recommend bringing in outside people to this? Like, do you ask a coach? Do you ask a parent? Or is it something that's really more internal?
I think I would start with doing your own evaluation, and then asking people that you trust how accurate it is.
Awesome. I mean, I guess the last thing, obviously it's a tough time for baseball players out there. Do you have any words for guys who are struggling a little bit?
Just that there will be baseball again,
Yeah,
and
that's the one thing we know right now.
to just appreciate what they have, appreciate the safety that they have, or the health that they have, or whatever it is that they have right now. Just to be grateful for it and appreciate it, and be patient, and use the time wisely.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate your time today. Thank you.
Thanks, Ken.